Hi, Evan J. Lawson here. Welcome to my bed and my bedroom. Still in lockdown here in Melbourne, in Australia, but we're slowly creeping our way out of it at the moment. During lockdown, some of my friends asked me, because they had so much spare time, what opera they should watch, because they'd never seen an opera before. And so I thought it would be cool to do a video around some of the pieces I recommended and like a kind of beginner's guide to opera. As you probably know, most operas are quite long, like 3 hours usually, and generally in another language, but of course there is lots of operas in English as well. So I wanted to put together a list of works worth looking into that are, I think, accessible and a good place to start, but not necessarily like the most or famous ones, because I don't think, and this is maybe where people are gonna, opera diehards are going to contradict me on the pieces that I've chosen, but I don't think that like you should necessarily go for the famous ones, because a lot of them are really long, and you've got to remember with opera it's really dated as well. Well, a lot of them are, like if they're old, so you've got to like think about these pieces of theatre that were written in like the 19th century and the 18th century. So I wanted to pick a list that like had some important operas and famous operas that people know, but also ones that are maybe less well known but are accessible. So that was what I tried to do with this list. I've put together a playlist of some examples from these operas, which you will be able to listen to here. And there are like videos of pretty much all of them on YouTube, like ripped free videos that you can watch. So if you do want to watch the operas, you have that opportunity. Of course, these operas are great to watch it live if you're able to do that somewhere in the world, but in Australia, we certainly can't see live theatre at the moment, which is a real shame. So the first opera I would recommend people to see is La Boheme. It's by Puccini, famous Italian composer. It's from the early 20th century, and people may know the story because it is the story of Moulin Rouge, the famous film. So it follows the same plot, or pretty much the same plot as that. It's super romantic, super beautiful, and it's in Italian, so it's really nice to listen to. And I think it's a great place to start because it's not too long. It's like 2.5 hours long. It's really beautiful, and most people will know the story, so you should be able to keep up really well. It's also like one of those pieces that's super famous, so generally the people in it are really good. That's another thing you often get, especially if you're like just Googling a free like opera video. You might get a production that is not got the best singers in it. So yeah, it's one that's like, you really can't fault on it. If you can find a video of the Visconti production from like the 60s, that's the one that I really like, but there's tons and you should find them and listen to them. The next one I would recommend is The Magic Flute. It's originally in German, but I've linked a recording to an English production that was done in New York with the New York's Metropolitan Opera. Magic Flute is on my list because you can't really talk about opera and not talk about Mozart. Mozart, of course, super famous composer. He wrote many, many operas, and some of them are really the cornerstones of the operatic repertoire. But because they come from like the 1780s, the 1790s, they're, as I said before, kind of a bit dated, and they are long. Like the Marriage of Figaro, which is often cited as being one of the greatest operas ever written, is like 3.5 hours long. So I think if you're a first-time opera viewer, Magic Flute is good because it's short. No one dies in it, which is really refreshing in opera. It's really fantastical, and certain productions, like this Metropolitan Opera one, are really good for kids. So, and the music is really, really beautiful and really fun, and it contains like a dragon and a wizard and the Queen of the Night, and there's lots of famous music in it. So I think it's a really good one. It also doesn't have what we call recitative. So recitative in opera is this thing where, in order to get from like the songs where a character sings about the love they have for someone. All the like necessary information, all the like narrative plot driven stuff is sung in opera, old opera, in what we call recitative. So it's like they kind of speak, they kind of sing. There's this sort of like not very complex accompaniment, and they'll be like, oh my god, I think I saw you and the bus the other day and I'm in love with you, and now I'm going to sing a song about that. So Magic Flute doesn't have much of that. It actually has mostly talking in between the songs. So again, it's a good one because you're not sitting through this sort of like dated, arbitrary recitative thing. Recitative can be really cool and serves a purpose, but it is not necessarily like the reason that you listen to old operas. You're there to listen to the beautiful singing in the songs. The third work I've chosen is one that you'll definitely know some songs from, and it is Carmen, in French, set in Spain from the middle of the 19th century by Georges Bizet. Carmen is so wild and such a great opera because it centers on this really fiery, sexy gypsy character. So the casting in it is really fun because you can have like the sexy gypsy Carmen, and then there's the man that she's like got wrapped around, well, the men she's got wrapped around her fingers, Escamillo and Don Jose, and then there is Micaela and a few other female roles which are very like prim and proper, and then there's other gypsies that are like really fiery and wild. So it has this very fun atmosphere, and the music is just amazing and really, really good. Like Magic Flute, it's what we call, well, sort of what we call a Singspiel, which is kind of like a musical where there is speaking in between the songs. So again, I think it's a good one. And there's so many amazing productions of Carmen. The next one, I've gone back into what we call Baroque music. So Baroque is music written before 1750, usually. And that music is older. It sort of predates Bach and Mozart and the kind of beginning of music really having like a centered style, but also like there were kind of rules that were put in place after 1750. Before 1750, because Europe was so disparate, you know, the music that was played in, say, Venice was really different to the music played in Rome, which was really different again to like Paris, and the French had very different styles to the Italians and so forth. And all the cities had different styles. So I thought it would be cool to include a work from that time because the music is so different to the other operas that I mentioned. But also the work I've picked, which is Dido and Aeneas. It's in English, so it's written by Henry Purcell around, I think, 1650s. I've probably got the date wrong, but it's around that sort of time. So it's interesting to listen to because it has, the music is so different to like what you might think opera being. It's so, so beautiful. It's also not very long. It's like an hour long, so it's a really good one to just squeeze in. And it's a pretty kind of straightforward story, but the music is really amazing. What I would say with any of these, some of the videos online, the writ ones, don't have captions, or if they've got captions, they might be in German or whatever. So you need to either find ones that have English, which can be really difficult, or what I do is just follow along with like Wikipedia, and also if you just Google like La Boheme libretto in English, you'll probably find a translation of the words. And because opera librettos, we call librettos, it's like the words, are not like the most in-depth pieces of poetry ever written, you can kind of skim along. I don't feel anyway that you need to know every single word that the singer is saying, but obviously it's like good to know that as well. So that's just like useful to have as well. So they're all on Wikipedia, all the synopses, and yeah, you can track down the librettos pretty easily. But most of the videos now, like, especially if you're getting ones from like official opera company YouTubes, will have closed captioning on it, which is really useful. The final two works I've picked are like Dido from a period that's like maybe not so well known for opera. I've picked a 20th and a 21st century opera for diversity, because I wanted to show that there is more to opera than just like Italian romantic music, which a lot of people probably have in their mind. So I picked Porgy and Bess, which is by George Gershwin, the famous jazz pianist, songwriter, wrote lots of famous songs and musicals, but he also wrote amazing opera, Porgy and Bess, and it's set in North Carolina, and it is the story of African Americans in this community called Catfish Row. And it is romantic and beautiful and sad and scary and fun and funny and jazzy. So it's a great piece, I think, because the music is so different, obviously, to the other operas I've mentioned. And Gershwin is so ingenious and so he's Jewish. He's a Jewish man, but he melds like African American spirituals and African American jazz and that kind of inflection with European avant-garde music and European Western music and Jewish popular music, and it sort of kind of rolls into one. It's really cool. And of course, it focuses on African American themes, which is something in opera it's either done very badly, and there's a strong history of racism in opera, and so it's good to include something where the portrayal of African American people is a little dated, but still the work is generally viewed as being, from what I've read, more sympathetic. The final work I would recommend is called L'amour de loin. My French pronunciation is probably terrible. It's by Kaija Saariaho, who is a Finnish composer, but she lives and works in France and writes in French, and she's still alive, and she is a woman. She's the only woman composer I've mentioned in this list. Again, another thing typical in opera is that women have often been ostracized from the creation of opera. There's not a huge amount before, say, 1900, many operas written by women. So I thought it'd be really important to include a work. I'm pretty certain it was written in like the early 21st century. So it's like 10 years old, 20 years old, something like that, maybe late 90s. And it is so cool. It's really, really incredible music. The way that she sets the French is so beautiful. And I'm not a native French speaker, but it sounds like it's really sophisticated and really well written for speakers of the French language. The music is incredible, and it's an important piece because it's gotten a lot of performances by big companies, and again, as I said, that's something that's rare for opera written by women, unfortunately. Probably it's reasonably well known because the Metropolitan Opera did it, I think, last year. So and it was the first opera by a woman that was performed by the Metropolitan Opera in like 100 years or something. They've only ever done like 1 or 2 other operas by a woman, which is ridiculous. So yeah, they're the operas that I would recommend. For the people out there who are like, where is Wagner in this list? A famous German opera composer. Like, Wagner's great and important and wrote amazing music, and you know, his operas are of course like some of the most important, the Ring Cycle, Tristan and Isolde, but they're long and they're really hard going for a first time opera listener. Like, I wouldn't send someone to see Tristan and Isolde if it was the first time they're ever going to the opera. I kind of think about it like a film. Like, would you send someone who is sort of interested in getting into silent movies to go see like maybe Metropolis, you know, like a 3-hour, like really complex silent movie? You'd probably start with something a little bit more straightforward. So that was my thinking with the list and why I didn't include any Wagner. But hey, if you want to dive in with something really crazy, Tristan and Isolde, Die Walküre, so many amazing, Parsifal, so many cool operas. I do have 4 little like wild cards if people want more things, more recommendations. Another Mozart opera would be Don Giovanni, which I've included in the playlist. The production I've included is incredible. If you can find the video, watch it. I love Don Giovanni. It's like sexy and wild, and it's certainly, unlike Magic Flute, it's not one for the children. It's a lot of sex and violence and lust going on. It's really cool. La Traviata, which like La Boheme is quite famous and similar, like Moulin Rouge, similar vibes. and you'd probably know the story. It's very similar. It's a Verdi opera. Again, like Wagner, I kind of have to mention Verdi as an important opera composer. The reason I didn't pick a Verdi for the main list was that I picked La Boheme, and I sort of ticked my Italian romantic opera box. I know some people will disagree with that, but yeah, I think Traviata is a masterpiece, and so I'm including it on my little side list. The last two are in English. Work by the famous English composer Benjamin Britten, who came to fame after the Second World War with this opera, Peter Grimes. It's psychological, it's scary, it's really tense. It's not, perhaps it's not like the best one to watch, the first opera you ever watch, but it's a good piece of theatre, and the music is really exciting, and it's written by a gay man, which I think is really important, and has some potential themes, queer themes in it, and even touches on pedophilia, and it's kind of uncomfortable, but I think it's why it's an important piece and why people might get something out of it, because the central character is like a really good anti-hero, and that's kind of good for opera. Like, it's so often opera characters are so like one-dimensional. Peter Grimes is not, and it gives you this like incredible psychological landscape. And the final work is a really new work. I think it's like a year old, or maybe 2 years old, by a composer from the United States. Her name is Ellen Reid, and the work is called Prism. It's spelt like capital P space R space I. Anyway, there'll be a link in the playlist, but oh my God, this piece of music is so cool. What I love about it is the narrative, the singing, like everything in it is incredible. But what musically Ellen does is meld these worlds of like traditional opera, contemporary classical music, where you have like really experimental, wild sounds, and pop music and like dance music. And I think that's why it'll appeal to people. The narrative is wild, and it's really quite, I actually haven't watched a video of it. I've listened to a recording of it. So I think if I watched it, I'd have a better understanding of the narrative. But the music is like so good, so well written, and yeah, this like pop music thing is really, I think for people who've never listened to opera, especially contemporary opera, it's a great like in, because you've got this sort of fun pop music thing to cling hold of. And again, she is a woman doing really cool stuff in opera, and that needs to be celebrated as much as possible. So that's my list. That's my little beginner's guide. Yeah, watch the pieces. Let me know what you think. And if you're a lover of opera and have watched other operas, let me know what operas I should have said, and what operas you really like, and what operas you would recommend people to do. Cool. Enjoy.